Greetings, brothers and sisters. I got a few things to get to. Again, my voice isn't great, so I don't know how much I'll be able to cover today. As soon as my voice starts to get irritated, I'm going to stop talking. So to start off with, I want to cover this woman, Stacey Plaskett. She is a representative from the Virgin Islands. And they presented what they called the new video evidence, which was just crappy security footage. But everybody in the mainstream media was calling it bombshell incriminating footage. But it was just, security footage, which sucks. It wasn't as good as the other stuff. But they have stated their case. She presents the case against Trump. This is the case against Trump, and it's really weak. This is, again, they don't have the votes already. And this is what the media would call conspiracy theory stuff. And let me show you what I'm talking about here.
Since that classification, the group has repeatedly engaged in serious acts of violence, including at pro-Trump rallies. And one such act, on September 7th, the Proud Boys attacked a man with a baseball bat and then punched him while he was down on the ground.
She's talking about the Proud Boys, and I'm not a Proud Boy person. I'm not, again, I'm anti-protest, and I don't believe that the system can be saved, and I'm anti-force, right? Using force always backfires, and it backfired against Trump here. But she's leaving out of this, in context, what was going on was these Antifa riots, whatever that means, right? In terms of Chaz and Chad and all these places around the country, there were these riots. And these Proud Boys and other, Trump-supporting groups started to show up at these riots and cause conflict, but the riots were out of control, and she's not saying that, right? That there was a left-leaning movement of taking over cities and the police standing down and things like this. So, again, if you're going to be honest, and this is, mainstream media that they want you to, authoritative media that's being put out there, and I've said this over and over again, that when I present things, I make sure I know what the official story is before I rip it apart, right? And so you can't leave out one side of the story. And so in terms of these groups, which again, I'm not supporting these groups, don't believe in these groups. I knew these groups were going to come back to haunt us and cost us all because they were setting up this narrative for a while. And Trump, like a dope, he was just an idiot, fell into this trap. You could see them setting the trap and Trump willingly going along with it because he just, he was just too proud of himself and too arrogant and things and oblivious. Their argument is very weak, right? Their argument here in terms of Trump's knowledge of what he was doing is non-conclusive. It's speculation.
On September 29th, during a presidential debate, President Trump was asked specifically if he was willing to condemn white supremacy and militia groups, if he was willing to tell them to stand down and stop the violence. Let's watch.
So if you understand, this is like a court of law where they have to prove this stuff, right? They have to present evidence, the same kind of evidence that Trump presented post the election. This is very similar argument. It's speculation. This could be true. I'm not saying that this isn't somewhat true or, partially true or whatever, but they don't have proof. You understand this? And they're basing this whole case on something, this whole impeachment case on something that they don't have proof, right? That Trump and these groups, including the Proud Boys, conspired to overturn the results of the election and basically have a coup and storm Capitol Hill. That Trump premeditated these actions by the group, not only incited them, but actually created the circumstances and purposefully coordinated a plan so this would happen. This is the case she's laying out here, that Trump was conspiring with these groups to overthrow the government, to overturn the election, and to storm Capitol Hill. And what she presents is a lot of circumstantial evidence and speculation, and a lot of the stuff they're presenting actually goes against their theory. It actually undermines their theory. So I'm going to go through this here.
But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm willing
prepared
to do
specifically
that, but
do it?
I
Go
would
ahead,
say,
sir.
Let's hear now the president's response.
Do it, sir.
say it, do it, say it. Do you want to call them, what do you want to call them? Give me a name, give me a
White
name. Go ahead.
supremacists and
Who would
white
you like me to condemn?
supremacists and right
Proud
militia.
Boys, stand back and stand by.
When asked to condemn the Proud Boys and white supremacists, what did our president say? He said, stand back and stand by.
The tone of the voice that she uses, the way that she says that, she makes it sound like it's fully incriminating and it's some horrible thing. I mean, this is how the media played that. And you have to make a distinction between the Proud Boys and these patriotic groups and racist groups and white supremacists who were, there were some of these groups that were supporters of Trump, and Trump should have condemned them and should have condemned violence. There's just no reason not to do that, right? He just should have done that from the beginning. All these hate groups, Trump should have spoke out against. And he should have done it with the Cubies. He should have done it with the Q movement. Like, I agree with all that stuff. But that doesn't mean this is premeditated. You understand this? He was asked a question at the debate, and he gave the answer that he thought was, he also, what she cut out there was that, why doesn't Biden do that about Antifa? Why doesn't Biden say this about Antifa and things like this, which he didn't do? And so that was part of Trump's answer. They cut out his answer, right? And the Proud Boys and white supremacists are different things. They're different groups. They link them together, right? The Proud Boys are people who are, I don't know that much about them, but are, they think they're patriots and they think they're defending the Constitution and things like this, like the Oath Keepers, who are considered terrorist groups, but they're much different than white supremacists, hate groups. They're not the same thing. And she's lumping them all together, as is the left wing, and they have been for a while. And Trump fell into this trap, right? And the other piece to this is, if I had to do a psychological profile on Trump, I had to, do a reading of him based in my professional credentials as someone who has a master's degree in counseling, and I did psychological assessments, also with the spiritual work that I do, and being someone who's intuitive, and I'm good at reading people. If you watch my videos, I have a ability to understand people's personality types and why they do the things that they do. And I would say, based in what I know about Trump and what most of you know about Trump, is that Trump values loyalty and his fans. He wants yes men around him. He wants people who worship him like his fans and supporters do. I mean, he's loving that part of it. He loves the crowd. That's one of the things he's getting out of this presidency. He has a big ego. He's narcissistic, and he likes people to worship him. And so all these groups, I mean, you see this with foreign leaders or anybody who's done well with Trump, are people that praise him and are just in his corner and loyal to him. And so these groups, these extreme right-wing groups, love Trump. And he wasn't going to go against them because the media, who he hates, was trying to tell him to denounce these groups. And he didn't want to do that because he hated the media and he loved the praise that he was getting from these groups. So I don't think he was a white supremacist or he endorsed the beliefs of these groups. I mean, the same thing with QAnon. He knew that Q was bogus. He knew there was no plan, as did, just General Flynn just said there's no plan. But Trump didn't want to disavow these groups because they were so loyal to him and they were considering him some sort of a hero, right? And so he played along because he didn't want to piss off his supporters. Plus, he felt like his supporters were loyal to him, and he loved it, right? He loved his followers. And so this is more of a cult leader thing and somebody who just loved the kind of, fans that he has. I mean, people don't like to denounce their fans. People don't like to do things to piss their fans off, right? I mean, it's, it's bad business and bad brand management. And Trump's no dope to that. So it didn't mean that he believed in these things or he actually agreed with these groups, in their interpretation, because they had their own version of Trump. They made up their own version of Trump. But it was more about him, loving the praise, loving the adoration he was getting from these groups.
Message was heard loud and clear. The group adopted that phrase, "stand back and stand by," as their official slogan. They created merchandise with their new slogan, which they wore proudly across their backs at Trump's rallies, and they followed the president's orders. You'll see more about this later in the trial, but you'll see in these photos, to the left, Dominic Pizzola, and to the right, William Pepe.
And so what they're trying to say is that the Trump and his team were cultivating this movement. They wanted this thing to happen later on, which, again, has been a disaster for Trump and the right wing and for the truth community and everybody else. All of these events, which I said over and over again. I've been saying this is what's coming. It was easy to see. It was a trap that anybody with, common sense could have avoided. I've talked about how protests don't work. I talked about the way that Trump was, using this language. I talked about this stuff that he said in the debate, and that they were setting up a narrative, and either Trump was participating in that because he's a shill, or he was a fool and he was just walking into a trap, which is now the trap is being sprung, right? So what the Democrats are doing here, what this woman is doing, Stacey Plaskett, is she is creating profiles of people in terms of, Trump and his supporters, and she's trying to give context to the events that you see happening on Capitol Hill and linking them to speeches and tweets and things Trump did. I mean, this is their whole case. They're trying to create a narrative. And in this narrative, what she just said was, Trump said something in a debate to the Proud Boys, and they adopted what he said as their slogan. And what they're saying is, when Trump realized that they adopted this thing as their slogan, he should have known that they would go out and do things and act on his behalf, and they might storm the Capitol. Like, he was cultivating this relationship where he would say things in public. This is the QAnon phenomenon, where he would say something and these groups would unpack it. They would get their QAnon decoder rings, because this is what these Q drops, these were Trump drops. And she's trying to say Trump would say something and these guys would interpret it in some way or another. And so Trump was, creating these circumstances by dropping this information, and his crazy followers, who then misinterpreted what he was saying or took it to another level, he knew they were going to do that. So then this way he's guilty of a crime because of the imaginations and the misinterpretation, delusionment of his followers, right? Because Trump never said, go storm the Capitol. He never said that publicly, and there's no evidence that he said it privately. There's no evidence that he wanted that to happen. There was no evidence he wanted these people to threaten Nancy Pelosi or any of these things. They have circumstantial evidence that shows he was in support of these groups and people, in terms of he never condemned them, and he never told them they were full of S, right? He never said, hey, you guys are crazy. Like, he never once reined in his crazy followers, which is true, and I think he should have done that. But again, it's not a crime that he didn't do that. It's bad politics, and it's being a bad leader. Like, I don't endorse him allowing these people to create imaginary fictional tales of him and what was going to happen, because they all deluded themselves into believing that Trump was behind something that he wasn't. And he never once said to them, said to these groups and people, you know what, this isn't happening. There is no plan. Q's a joke, right? This stuff isn't going to happen. There's not going to be a military tribunals. There's not going to be a military coup. All these things that were being put out there by Cubies and other people, Trump knew about it. I'm sure he knew about it. Everyone knew about it. And he never once came out and said, you guys, you're going too far. This isn't going to happen. In fact, he did sort of cultivate this idea that, hey, I'm a part of this, trust the plan. Like, he didn't say it, but he, said it in ways that gave the Cubies hope and things. I talked about this. And for that, he showed bad leadership. But it's not a crime. Like, what he did wasn't a crime. It was just not being a good person or a good leader. And, you don't impeach somebody because of that, right? This isn't impeachable, especially since the guy's already left office and you don't have the votes. The Republicans aren't going to vote. You're not going to get 17 Republicans. So this is just a big sort of conspiracy theory that they're putting out there that's not true. It's irresponsible. They're wasting taxpayers' money for something that is dead on arrival. Like, the whole thing is, it makes the Democrats look just like Trump. Like, they're defying themselves by doing the same sort of things they're accusing him of making, up conspiracy theories about things that they can't prove and aren't really true. So this is, I told you way back when this happened, right before the election, I said this was stupid, and I was pissed at Trump. This happened a week before the election, where his dopey Texas supporters tried to run a bus off a road, right? We're harassing a bus. And if you've ever driven on a highway, and, highways are dangerous because you're going so fast. Any kind of an accident usually means that somebody's going to die or be severely hurt or maimed. And there were innocent people on the highway that weren't Biden supporters. They weren't part of the Biden bus. Plus, Biden and Harris weren't even on the bus. So these are just, people who are politicians or whatever. And these trucks and these, there was unsafe driving going on. I demonstrated this in a video. And I talked about how, and again, this, I'm talking about how this case that right now in this video is weak and based in speculation and conspiracy theory, which is okay for the Democrats and the liberals. That's what the point of this video is, but it's also not being a dope, right? So this is Trump tweeting this thing, right? And he should have condemned this act because it was dangerous for ordinary people, and it wasn't with his message of law and order. You don't harass the other people. They were harassing this bus, and you can see it from the video. I don't know. I'll post that video again at some point because it was just stupid. And I was like, you know what? Like, F this guy, right? Like, doing stupid things like this. This was like a week before the election or a couple of weeks before the election. And I was like, I don't care if he loses. He said, this is bullying and intimidating, and now it's coming back to haunt him. You don't do stupid stuff like this. And his supporters and the people who are still thinking that this is going to win, using force and using intimidation, every time you do this, you're going to be set up and you're going to look like the bad guy. You're falling into a trap that they want to. They're provoking you so that you'll do stupid stuff like this.
The President of the United States tweeted a video of his supporters trying to drive a bus off the road. You'll recall in that first video that I showed you, there was no sound. Well, the one that he tweeted had a fight theme song placed to it that the president put that music to that video. And he added at the top, "I love Texas."
There's no way Trump put that music onto that video. You think he did the editing there? You think the president has that kind of technical skill that he took that video and put that music in there? I mean, that's what she just said. She said that he put that there. Trump's team put that there. I mean, Trump tweeted it. Trump liked it. Trump said, okay, let's use this one. Maybe he asked somebody to do it. We don't know what happened there. Or maybe one of his team said, hey, look at this thing. And so, again, he tweeted it. He didn't retweet it. So we don't know what happened there, but I can guarantee you that Trump didn't put the music on himself, right? And this is supposed to be like a court of law. They're trying him. They are, this is a legal process. This is a trial. And what she said was false. Like, she doesn't know that. She announced it like it's fact. She said, Trump put that music there.
That the president president put that music to that video, and he added at the top, "I love Texas."
The sanctimonious way that she's talking is just so brutal, right? This, I love Texas, right? It's, like it's disingenuous. It's embellishing. This isn't just presenting the information, like I say here. If the truth is the truth, you present it in a way that's just, without sensationalizing it, without playing on people's emotions, without getting sanctimonious. I mean, I talk about that in terms of truther videos. If you have the truth on your side, then just say it. Just say it plainly without any emotion. You don't have to, you don't have to embellish it. You don't have to make it bigger or sexier than it is, right? Just say the truth. You don't need to, and if people receive it, they receive it. Just put the truth out there and let it go. I mean, that's what I do here. And, I mean, it works because you're not putting your own emotional twang on it.
By the next evening, that tweet that he did had been viewed 12.6 million times. And it wasn't just a tweet. On November 1st, at a Michigan rally with a sea of supporters, the president talked about that incident again. Here it is.
Do you see the way our people, they were protecting his bus yesterday because they're nuts. So his bus, they had hundreds of cars. Trump, and the American flag. That's it. You see Trump and American flag.
The president made a public joke of violence against campaigners in an American election.
It wasn't violence. It wasn't violence. They didn't do any violent. Now, I condemn this thing, and I condemn Trump saying this, if you watch my video, because it was stupid, and it's bad behavior, and people could have got hurt, and it wasn't going to change the election. It just made him look bad. It was stupid. Trump's stupid in this way, and he was, he was cultivating sort of a relationship with stupid people, emotionally fired up people, and Trump was, in that sense, accountable for the things that happened later on, because he clearly was doing these things. But it wasn't violence. She said it was violence.
Public joke of violence against campaigners in an American election.
It was intimidation. It was bullying, but that's not violence. You understand this? There's a distinction here. They didn't get violent. They were threatening. There were a couple times, a couple of the cars, there were some cars with the bus that the trucks were sort of trying to run off the road a little bit, and so that's threatening. I mean, they're jockeying for position, both the Biden campaigners and the Trump people, but it wasn't violence, right? This is something where it is bullying. It's clear bullying. That's what anybody can see that. And Trump condoned it, which now he's paying for, and he should pay for it, not in the sense of being impeached because they can't prove premeditation, and I don't think he premeditated it. I think Trump's really just a dope. He's a dummy. Like Trump is shown over and over again, especially the last 2 months after the 2 months after the election. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's a complete fool. When I started reading his tweets, like all of them, on a regular basis, he's a guy who didn't seem to have control over his administration. He didn't have his control. He said at one point, I hope my lawyers are listening to this. Like he didn't have control over his law team. I mean, Trump, he said in one tweet, what way is this to run a country? Like, he's the president. Like, I think he just was over his head because he was, he was Trump and he was used to running a company and he didn't know how to, he wasn't politically savvy. He was a good campaigner and he was good at creating a enthusiasm in his followers. And he, cultivated that, but I don't think he was very good at understanding politics and how these things play out. And you can see it now because he kind of, walked right into this narrative.
He made light of it. This was not a joke. In fact, it was so violent, it put so many people in harm's way that the FBI investigated the incident and the criminal responsibility of those who attacked these campaign workers.
Again, I don't think anybody went to jail for this, but it wasn't violent, right? There was some, what they were doing, I think, was basically legal in terms of driving down the road and honking and having flags and things like this. You could say there was some unsafe driving. And, I mean, it was not cool. It was definitely intimidating. They were trying to intimidate the bus. And that was something that now, has hurt Trump, which I said, back then. It was stupid. It was a bad thing to do. But her saying over and over it was violent. And the FBI investigates all kinds of things, right? And so she's sensationalizing something and making it bigger than it is. Like, she could talk about it the way I'm talking about it. It was stupid. It was irresponsible. And somebody could have got hurt or died. There could have been, and it would have been their fault, right? It didn't happen, and it was immature, right? It's not like, this isn't quality behavior. And it makes the, when the president is behind voter intimidation, campaign intimidation, like that's a real problem. And Trump lost the moral high ground by condoning these things, right?
Now, our President Donald Trump could have said, okay, I didn't realize how bad that was. This was very violent. Please stop. But he didn't. He saw the investigation and made a statement in defense of his supporters' attack on the bus, writing, quote, "In my opinion, these patriots did nothing wrong."
What she's not reading here is, instead, the FBI justice should be investigating the terrorists, anarchists, and agitators of Antifa who run around burning down our democratic cities and hurting our people, which is also true. And that's the problem here, because it's completely one-sided. The Antifa stuff, which I thought was a setup as well and part of this thing, which help feed into this, because... So I think this is one of the most important things I have to say about all this. And I've talked about the use of force. Whenever you use force, there's a counterforce. And this is spiritual science as well as physical science. If you push, then there is a counter push, a push back that comes at you. In life, whenever you use force, you use force on, the environment, right? When whatever, like, let's say you go out and you plow a field in a very, forceful way, because our machinery is very forceful. And then you have this open field and you sow your seeds, whatever you want to grow. But the weeds are better. The weeds are more competitive than your crops. So now you have to do something to get rid of the weeds. So you use pesticides, some sort of poison, right, which is forceful to kill the weeds, but it goes into the soil, then goes into your food, and you eat it. Now you're eating pesticides, which is, again, a counterforce, like nature is coming back at you, right? And so, or any number of things happen. You deplete your soil. I mean, there's all kinds of ways. And then the next thing you know, you have a weakened species because they're eating pesticides and there's no nutrition in their soil, and their crops and their food doesn't have nutrition in it, and they're unhealthy and things like this, GMO or the rest of it. And so working with nature to grow your crops, in terms of permaculture or some, less aggressive, less forceful way of doing it is the way to go. In the heartfulness system, the Sajmark system, the transmission that's given to people in the meditation is called the forceless force, and it's God's love. And it's the most powerful because it's the most subtle. The more subtle something is, the more powerful it is. And God's love, there's no counterforce, right? People think that love and hate are opposites, or love and fear are opposites. But love has no opposite. Love is, love. It's one of the only thing in the universe that doesn't have a counterforce or an opposite side of it, right? Because happiness, is you have depression or sadness and things like this, right? Everything has a polar opposite. We have a binary system, two sides of the coin, but love doesn't have another side. Love is just love, right? It is the, media of all creation. And so whenever you do something with force, you're going to expect a counterforce back, right? It's just, everyone should be aware of that. Like, if you act in a way that's going to provoke other people, you just got to accept that they're going to come back at you, that nature is going to provide a response. And with Donald Trump in this thing, well, it started off with the police force. So you have police that are there to impose some sort of division between the haves and the have-nots. the police are mostly there to make sure the people who are poor or criminal or, based in demographics, based in race or whatever it might be, are, on one side of the fence, and then they provide a fence, right, between the wealthy people and the impoverished people. I mean, there's other functions of the police, but that's one of them. And so in terms of the black community, they felt like they've been profiled and targeted for so many years, which is definitely the case to some extent, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons the police exist, not specifically based on race, but based on socioeconomic status and things. But race plays a part in it. And so there's these incidents that happen with questionable police tactics and things like this that were played on the media that was provoking a reaction. And again, the media wasn't really supporting these demographics. They weren't supporting Black Lives Matter in terms of giving them a bigger piece of the pie, giving them more money, giving them more opportunity. They were just provoking a reaction, right, among, liberal people and all these other groups, including Antifa, that seems to be some kind of controlled opposition. So there was riots, right? So now there was the police force, and then there was the force of the media, the force of the, politicians and Hollywoods and athletes and stuff pushing these ideas out there, right? So there would be a reaction. The same way that the same behavior they're accusing Trump of, they were inciting a group that feels marginalized and feels disenfranchised. And so that group started to protest, and then they put in provocateurs, people who were there to up the ante, that were there to escalate the situation. And so you had Chaz and Shop, and you had all of this, all these places that were being vandalized and things like that, right? And now you had the Trump supporters that were pro-police, and Trump was supposed to be a law and order president. He campaigned on law and order. And then he had his supporters who saw these buildings being burnt down and people getting ripped out of their cars and stuff the media wasn't showing, like MSNBC and CNN, but was, floating around the internet, some of the, horrific acts of these groups. And literally, the Seattle mayor, basically, or was it the governor? I don't know. The mayor or the governor allowed them to create Chaz and all these things. And so the Trumpers are getting, they're frothing at the bit, and Trump is playing into that. So he, creates a counterforce, and nature creates a counterforce. Trump is being created by the agenda. Like, Trump didn't come out of a vacuum. The left and, the Obama administration and the mainstream media were pushing an agenda that was flipping out a group of people, and they got their leader, right, a counterforce. It's all this stuff, right? You're using force to push an agenda. And so then Trump's people came and started to, be anti. I mean, you see Trump supporters getting punched and people getting punched for wearing MAGA hats. And so they're getting riled up and angry. And so they create a counterforce, and they start showing up at some of these events. And, there was multiple incidences, right? People dying and things like this. And Trump is like, well, those are my supporters. I'm not going to condemn them. And Biden is not going to condemn the Antifa people. But it was only viewed at one side. Like, Trump was the bad guy, and Biden wasn't, doing anything wrong by the mainstream media and the powers that be, because it's, the power has shifted. It used to be the right wing, white conservative Republicans were the privileged group. They were the group that was, they were given more power and more say in the government, and now that's flipping, right? They're flipping the power dynamics, but they're not really flipping it because there's less power and money to go. They're just bringing down the middle and upper middle class, and it's not based completely on race and things like this. It's based on, if you have money and you're an upper middle class person, you're now being taken down because there's not as much money. They're getting rid of lots of programs and things like this, and they want division so that they can blame other people instead of seeing that it's a systemic problem. It's the system's fault. But either way, both sides are using force, and it's creating more and more resentment and force on the other side, which escalates and eventually has to become some sort of an all-out war. That's what I've been talking about, because so many people are angry and they just want to go out and get the other side. The people who just wanted to take Trump down now has created this counterforce, and this is playing into the hands of the great dividers, right? people who live, need division to give everybody a new deal. And that's how this is rolling out. That's why I'm saying just, don't participate in it, right? Like they're trying to provoke you, and, it's just so that the reactions that people give will justify. They're saying, look at how bad these humans are, right? Look at how bad people are. So they don't deserve anything. We'll just take everything away from them. They don't, they shouldn't be able to vote. They shouldn't have Social Security. Like they'll justify their taking away of your stuff, their promises, breaking their promises to you because of your actions, right? Right now it's the right that they're demonizing, but at the end of the day, it'll be both sides that'll lose out on this thing. And what they're doing is provoking division, and stop feeding into it. Stop thinking that the Republicans or the Democrats are so much worse than your group, right? I mean, most people here are people who lean to the right. People are more, Republican. And that's just what they want you to be. They want you to choose a side. And the side, neither one of the sides is right. Neither one of the sides is going to bring you the truth. It just gives you an enemy. It gives them control because you're fighting with each other as they take away your, whatever's got to be taken away. And stop fighting against them as well, the so-called elites, because the system is going down no matter what. Like there's no saving this system. Every system collapses at some point. Everything dies at some point. And this is the point, the next whatever. It might take 100 years for it to be completely extinguished. I don't know the time frame, but it's in the dying process. It's not, growing. It's not being maintained. It's dying. Everything's going to fall apart. And you're going to see this over, and there's going to be bigger events coming. And so prepare for that. Prepare for the change. Prepare to be, become a better person yourself. The Heartfulness Meditation is here for that, to cultivate your character development. You become a better person. You become a person that's, deserving of something better than this crappy system. And therefore you'll help manifest something better.
Engaging in violence for him made them patriots to Donald Trump. For anyone who says Donald Trump didn't know the violence he was inciting, I ask you to consider his supporters tried to drive a bus off the highway in the middle of the day to intimidate his opponent's campaign workers.
What she said there is simply not true, because it wasn't violence and they didn't try to drive the bus off the road. What they did was they were basically talking smack. They were being intimidating and they were bullying, but they weren't being violent. That wasn't violence. No violence occurred. See, what she said there was fundamentally dishonest. I mean, it's not, slightly dishonest. It's untrue. And you guys might remember I made a couple of videos and I got all kinds of Trumpers that were mad at me, but I was right about that then, just like I'm right about it now, that what Trump did was stupid. It hurt his case in so many ways. Again, he's a person that was preaching law and order for the past 5 years. It was part of his 2016 campaign and a big part of his winning message in terms of things that were winning for him in this past election. He was doing well on law and order. And then to encourage this type of bullying behavior, and you don't know how the truck driver might have panicked, the bus driver might have panicked, or whether truck drivers could have done something because there's a lot of big trucks there involved. And it could have caused panic for other people who were driving by, and it could have caused some sort of situation where there could have been a multi-car pileup and multiple deaths. Trump should have never encouraged this. And I was firm about this, and I made a couple videos, and I just told the Trumpers to leave because what I was saying is the truth. Like whether they could handle it or not wasn't my problem. But in terms of what this person, Stacey Plaskett, is saying, she's doing the same thing as what I said Trump did. She's undermining her case against Trump and their case against Trump by saying things that aren't true. It isn't true that the trucks tried to run the bus off the road. They weren't doing that. They were beeping, they were waving flags, they were being intimidating, they were bullying, but it wasn't violent and it wasn't moving the trucks off the road. There was no physical contact that you could say was violent. And these people were armed. They were, Texans with guns and trucks. They could have shot at the bus. I mean, they could have done all kinds of things that would have been violent. They could have hit the bus with their cars. They could have taken a couple of their trucks and tried to force the bus off the side of the road, which, I mean, that would have been a felony and it could have caused all kinds of problems, but they didn't do that. There was some jostling of position with them in some cars, and certainly the people in the bus and the car, the cars that were Biden cars, were probably scared, and I said that in my video. Like, that's not cool. Like, what he did there, what they did was a punk move. I talked about it. I called them punks, and, Trump was the punk in chief. I mean, I can't remember the language, but I was like, if this guy loses, he deserves to lose. It was a stupid move. It was something stupid that they did, his supporters, and it was hurting his case in every level, and it's hurting his case now. But what she just said isn't true. You understand this? In the same way that Trump was hurting his case to be elected, that he was somebody into law and order, they're saying that Trump was irresponsible and putting out false information that inflamed his supporters, incited his supporters. She's doing the same thing here, right? She's saying things that aren't true and exaggerating the events to make Trump sound worse than he is. And she's trying to string together all these events saying that they were leading to some sort of conspiracy to overthrow the government, when clearly these events were independent of each other, because there was a string of other events like Trump losing the election and there being questionable things going on there, and then him losing one court case after another, and even Republicans bailing on Trump, that made them go into this state, made these people go into this state, right? They were, perhaps going into that state all along, but these events weren't planned out. Like, there were events that happened out of their control, out of Trump's control, that incited the mob more than Trump ever could, because a lot of things didn't go the way that they thought was fair and just, and they had some legitimate arguments mixed with, some craziness and some incitement and all these things. But it isn't like they did this completely on their own, because the system was definitely against them in ways that, the media and the people that run the establishment in Hollywood and the way the culture is going, they're clearly being marginalized. So their reaction is to that. The same reaction that the other protests, the Antifa, the BLM protests, were praised because those demographics had every right to protest and they had every right to be upset, where the Trump supporters and Trump had no reason to be upset. That's, how this thing was framed by the establishment, by most of the establishment.
And his response was to tweet the video of the incident that had fight music, joke about it, and call those individuals in that incident patriots.
See, they are putting together, she's trying to put together a case, and this is where their case fails, because they need to create this. They need to create this aspect of the case, and that is that it's premeditated and there's a plan, and they knew what they were doing, and it was, they were putting together what they call an insurgency. And really, if you look at it, it's a bunch of dopes. There might be some provocateurs. Yeah, and Trump should have known better, and he kind of knew what was going to happen without, really knowing what's going to happen, in the sense that he didn't know how this was going to play out. He definitely cultivated these things, and he's accountable for that. But he didn't sit down and make a plan, right, with these groups so that someday this would happen. Like, these were a bunch of events that unfolded, and Trump's not condemning these guys and actually, propping them up and saying, yeah, this is what I like, this is good. It's a bunch of, like, high school students being stupid, right, partying, or college students, and their parents or the dean of the school, saying, yeah, we like you to do this stuff, right? When adults are supposed to say, calm down and, stop doing these things, the person in charge actually says, no, do more of those things, more frat parties, more dummy behavior. So Trump was cultivating this immature and dummy behavior and acting out, and it ultimately blew up in his face because the left was seeing that he was doing this, and they wanted this to happen, right? The left was more, if anybody had a plan, it would be the people on the left that were cultivating the dumminess here, the dummies, Trump supporters and the dummy that was Trump, and saying, all right, let's, provoke them more. Let's push this into something that we can use against them, because they're winning this thing. Although, this could backfire here because the impeachment is a waste of money. They don't have the votes and they don't have the proof.
Once again, Donald Trump's praise worked to incite them further. Emboldened by that praise, they remained ready to fight, ready to stand back and stand by. This link is not hypothetical.
It's totally hypothetical. If you're saying this is a plan that Donald Trump was orchestrating, that's clearly not. You don't have proof of that, and that really isn't what happened here. You're making it into something that it's not. Like you're showing just one side of the story, and there was other events going on. There was the COVID, and there was the stuff that was questionable about the election that you guys are dismissing and pretending there wasn't any evidence of it being. I mean, even just in the sense of the way the media and all the powers that be gave Biden a free pass and demonized Trump, right? And demonized the Trump supporters, and Trump supporters all being described as ignorant, clueless, racist, right? Uneducated racists. And that was offensive to them, right? The way they are being categorized. And so there was there was force coming from your side, and when you dismiss all those things, and you're doing what you say Trump did, right? Especially the stuff with Antifa and these other things. Like if you're saying Trump premeditated these things, well, you also premeditated. You did things, as a group, as a media, as Democratic officials, as Hollywood celebrities, as athletes, to provoke the right into doing these things. If you're saying the Antifa riots and the Black Lives Matter riots and, these violent things that happened came out of, justification, like you provoke those things, right? Powerful people provoke those things as well. And so, if Trump's accountable, then all of the Democratic establishment and the media is accountable for what happened in Chaz and these other places.
Just like we saw with the Proud Boys showing up in full force on January 6th, Donald Trump's encouragement of this attack made sure his supporters were ready for the next one. The rally was organized by Women for America First. The same group that you'll see later secured the permit for the January 6th rally. And who else was there? The Proud Boys, standing by. Donald Trump did not attend that rally, but he made sure to make clear his supporters throughout the day how he felt about the event. At 8:47 a.m., he sent out a tweet. "We have just begun to fight."
To claim that this is a part of it, because this is typical political language. This is pep rally language. You'll hear this, cheerleaders will say this, right? At a pep rally. You see Democrats will say this at a convention or at a political speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, my mother, my hero, and our next president, Hillary Clinton.
This is my fight song. This is my fight song. Take back my life song.
So this is my fight song, her theme song for 2016. This is her accepting the nomination. Fight, 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 fight. She talked about fighting all the time. We are supposedly fighters in America, and there is a violence in America based in us having spent, 60% of our income goes to the military. I mean, think about that. If you were an individual and you spent 60% of your income on weapons and, defense and or whatever, not just defense, aggressive weapons, first strike weapons and things like this, you would be picked up, right? You would be on all these lists and everyone would be scared of you and you would be considered some kind of a crazy person for spending 60% of all your money on weapons. And that's what America does as an institution. And, if you look at America as being an individual, we spend the majority of our money on weapons. And there's all this violence in films and violence in sports. Fight, 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 right? At the Super Bowl, at these at football games, they have military flyovers of, these jets and things. And, I lived near a military base, near, Air Force, and they used to fly over our farm, cows and things, what I mean? They buzz you, right? They would come by, and it was really close to the ground, these military jets. There was these giant, like, helicopter plane things they have or whatever that are, they have this powerful thing. It sounds like, some kind of demonic things coming at you. I mean, you could hear, I mean, it has this, powerful engine and things like this, loud. It's intimidating. And so we're an intimidating culture, right? Intimidation is a part of our language. And this is very typical language that's used by Americans in terms of rallying people, and these people carrying flags. I mean, all these things are a part of the American culture. These war banners, the Star Spangled Banner is a war song. We're a warlike people. And we have this, extensive military and extensive weaponry. And so to pin this on Donald Trump, to say we have just begun, I mean, it's just ridiculous, right? And then she goes through these various, why all these things that were being said on the internet, right, by these groups. And I'm not going to go through it because it's, this video is getting long, like I said. My voice is going. And so, but she presents this case of all these things that these groups, Proud Boys and other groups, were doing on the web and language they were using like this as a part of a plan. Like there was some kind of a plan that eventually ended up being the storming of the Capitol, and that Trump was involved. And so here's the big part right here.
Rallygoers to remain at the ellipse until the counting of the state electoral slates was completed, just like they had remained at Freedom Plaza after the second Million MAGA March. In fact, the permit stated in no uncertain terms that the march from the ellipse was not permitted. It was not until after President Trump and his team became involved in the planning that the march from the ellipse to the Capitol came about, in direct contravention of the original permit. This was not a coincidence. None of this was. Donald Trump, over many months, cultivated violence, praised it, and then when he saw the violence his supporters were capable of, he channeled it to his big, wild, historic event. He organized January 6th with the same people that had just organized a rally, resulting in substantial violence, and made absolutely sure this time these violent rallygoers wouldn't just remain in place. He made sure that those violent people would literally march right here to our steps, from the ellipse to the Capitol, to stop the steal. His cavalry.
So one of these groups call themselves the cavalry or whatever, but I mean, that's just whatever it is, right? And cavalry doesn't do what we saw happen at Capitol Hill. That wasn't a cavalry. Cavalry rides on horses. And so like some group said, we're the cavalry, we're not waiting, we don't wait for anybody else. So that's, whatever it is. But what she just said here is true in the sense that he helped and he sent these guys to the steps. He sent them to the steps. And that is, that's totally true. Donald Trump, we heard him in his speech, he sent the people, his followers, to the steps. He didn't send them in. And there's no proof that he sent them in. He definitely, he cultivated this stuff, like she said, and, I've agreed with this. That's all true. He cultivated these things. He made a lot of bad decisions. That's all true. But what he did is he took them from where they were, the original protest was, and he sent them down Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol. And that's true, but he didn't say to go in. And maybe he should have known. He totally should have known that that would have happened. And he's irresponsible as a leader. But in terms of criminality, he isn't, right? This isn't criminal behavior on his part. He didn't commit criminal behavior here. He didn't do something that would make them go into the Capitol. He led them to the steps. That's all true. But that's not impeachable. Leading them to the steps is not impeachable. Everything that happened up to that point in terms of going to the steps is, you know, maybe he's more responsible for that. But if they acted out violently, he even said in, you know, one part of his speech. So here's the part of Trump's speech here where actually he uses the word peacefully in the protests. And what they were trying to do yesterday is say that Trump sent the mob to go and kill Mike Pence. I mean, that the evidence they were presenting, I'm not covering that here, but some of it was like he was inciting them to kill Mike Pence. You can hear from his language here and the tone of his voice, he's clearly not doing that. They did that on their own. The ones that went in there, because some of the rioters said that they were going after Pence, and many of them tweeted these things or said those things in the riot or whatever was going on. They said these things in the riot, but Trump didn't say to do that. In fact, you can hear from his language here.
He looked at this and he said, what an absolute disgrace that this could be happening to our Constitution. And he looked at Mike Pence, and I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so. I hope so. Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. All he has to do...
That wasn't true. And Mike Pence, you know, and I'm not a Mike Pence fan. I like Trump better than Mike Pence. But Mike Pence was set up here by Trump. But he didn't say go kill him. So you got to make a distinction. What Trump is doing here is Mike Pence was a loyal soldier for him. Mike Pence was somebody that, you know, the Republicans put in there because Trump wasn't a mainstream politician. And some of the Republicans they were scared of Trump, Republican voters. And so Mike Pence was sort of like one of his supposed to be handlers and somebody who was like just, you know, a very boring Republican politician. And so it gave Trump some, you know, Republican street cred for his people that didn't like Trump, that were Republicans or a little scared of Trump. And Mike Pence was supposed to represent the moderate Republicans and things and talk Trump down from some of his crazier beliefs. And so he was put on the ticket. And for years, Mike Pence took a lot of heat for just agreeing with Trump on everything and basically, you know, never being disloyal to Trump. And Trump was completely happy with Mike Pence. But then this election thing went down, and Trump's team came up with this cockamamie scheme that if Mike Pence rejected the election results, which isn't his job, which he's not supposed to do, he doesn't really have the power to do that, and send it back to the states, that Trump could become president. But Mike Pence wasn't supposed to do that. And, you know, and Mike Pence finally pushed back a little bit because he was being put in a horrible position. Because if he did that, he was destroying his political career. If he's, you know, and he would be demonized forever, and Trump would bail on him like he bails at everybody else. But if he didn't do what Trump says, Trump supporters were going to rip him apart. So Mike Pence was, you know, completely screwed over by Trump, a no-win situation. And so that's, you know, Trump being just a punk and, you know, it's just it was a big ask for him to do this. And then to pressure his supporters, to pressure Pence isn't cool, right? And so all these things are bad on Trump. But he didn't say to those guys, he didn't even imply it, that he wanted them to go physically confront Pence. I mean, listen to the language here.
All Vice President Pence has to do is send it back to the states to recertify, and we become president, and you are the happiest people. And I just spoke to Mike. I said, Mike, that doesn't take courage. What takes courage is to do nothing. That takes courage. And then we're stuck with a president who lost the election by a lot, and we have to live with that for 4 more years. We're just not going to let that happen, and we're going to have to fight much harder. And Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country.
So again, he said some things that were negative towards Pence, and he says he's got to come through for us. If he doesn't, it'll be a sad day. He's not saying go get the guy, right? Clearly not saying that. So I was having a little bit of a computer issue, and I had to render the video, and I just don't want to explain it because it's not important. But I went and I turned on the news, and they had this going on, the impeachment, And this guy was talking, and it just fit right in to my video.
The evidence is clear. We showed you statements, videos, affidavits that prove.
Affidavits. They're taking affidavits the same way Rudy Giuliani took affidavits that everybody ignored, right? For Trump, Trump, I mean, if you guys have a case here, then Trump has a case or had a case for the election thing, because it's the same kind of evidence.
Prove President Trump incited an insurrection that he alone had the power to stop. And the fact that he didn't stop it, the fact that he incited a lawless attack and abdicated his duty to defend us from it, the fact that he actually further inflamed that mob, attacking his vice president while assassins were pursuing him in this Capitol.
That's what I heard. I want to include that. Assassins. They're not assassins. Nobody would look at that group and say they're assassins. Dopes, yeah, there's lots of words to describe them, but assassins weren't any of them, right? I mean, it was an unruly mob, and they were looking for Mike Pence, and maybe a few of them were actually, looking to do Mike Pence harm, but no one would call them assassins. See, this is how ridiculous it is. When you use words like that, you just play yourself, and you undermine, if that's what you got, like calling them assassins, calling those dopes assassins.
More than requires conviction and disqualification.
If he sent assassins at Mike Pence, then we're talking about a whole nother level of thing. And so you don't even believe what you're saying because this is nothing. Like, for one, you don't have 17 Republicans who are going to vote for you, especially since your stuff is ridiculous. Like, no one's going to put any pressure on them to vote for you guys because, your stuff is, like, this evidence is ridiculous. And number two, Trump's already out of office, and he's done. I mean, people think he's going to run again, but, I mean, the way he went out and, he didn't deliver. Trump didn't deliver. I'll make another video about that some point. He just simply didn't deliver. But to call these guys assassins.
Because you're sworn to uphold our Constitution. Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. We have come to demand that Congress do the right thing and only count the electors who have been lawfully slated. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
Peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Now, he's sending some mixed messages here, but by saying that, he's not saying, and if you look at if you go through most of the speech, it's a lot of complaining, a lot of helplessness, a lot of whining, and he uses the words fight, and he's sending them down Capitol Hill, but clearly he's not thinking that, or at least saying to go do what they did. Like, he's not saying go into the Capitol. There's nothing in the speech that says that. He sent them down there. He brought them to Washington, D.C. All bad moves. I've talked about that over and over again. I believe these are all bad moves on Trump's part. But he didn't send them in to get Mike Pence, which the Democrats are saying. And he didn't concoct this thing over a series of months. he cultivated some extreme groups. He cultivated some, dopes, right? He cultivated the Q thing. I mean, he should have demonized all these things. I agree with that. He cultivated stupidity and, anger. And I mean, he, with his rhetoric here, and, he said that this has got to happen and it'll be the end of the country as we now know it. I mean, he used extreme language here. And so it isn't like he didn't do anything, but he certainly didn't send them into the Capitol. And there's zero evidence saying that he intended to do so. And here's where this woman from, this senator or congresswoman from the Virgin Islands, which I'll talk about in a little bit, because that's I lived there for a little bit, and it's a scary place, right? But this is in her presentation where she tries to show premeditation on Trump's part.
This was deliberate. And because the President of the United States incited this, because he was orchestrating this, because he was inviting them, the insurgents were not shy about their planning. They believed they were following the orders of the commander-in-chief. They were, as the tweet we just saw, quite literally his cavalry. So they posted exact blueprints of the attack openly, loudly, proudly. And they did this all over public forums. These were not just hidden posts in dark websites that Trump would not have seen. Quite the opposite. We know that President Trump's team monitored these websites. We know this because his advisors confirm it.
So this is where she's going to show her facts and proof. These were the same kind of, things that Trump was saying post the election that was thrown out as baseless. This would be considered baseless. And if you went to a district attorney and said, this is the information I have connecting Trump to the riots, connecting him to some sort of plan, like behind closed doors, they were having some sort of plan. And if they were having some sort of behind closed doors plan, then these rioters, these, insurgents as they're calling them, like I just think they're a bunch of over emotional, angry dopes, right? That got violent and got, liquored up and went in there and did some stupid things, right? Went into a mob frenzy. This was a mob and not an insurrection, based in everything that I've seen. And one of the reasons is if this was planned and it was a coup and it was, precision, they wouldn't have announced it on various websites and social media. Like that's, you understand this? Like Trump and them could have done this behind closed doors and they could have put this thing together without announcing things on social media, and Trump saying stupid things in speeches and places like that, which would get him caught later on. If you're going to do an insurgency, you need to do it underground and secretly. You can rally the mob, but you have to do the other parts secretly. And if anybody did that, it would have been the Democrats and the, intelligence community, CIA. If anybody's behind this, it's them because they're winning this thing. This is a gold mine for them, right? This is killing Trump. It destroyed his legacy. I mean, he was run out of town because of this event, and he just walked into the trap, as did his dopey followers. And this is her so-called proof right here.
An ex-White House and campaign insider, as you'll read, who has known both Scavino and the president for years, said there was no way that Scavino and the Trump social media operation would not have been aware of the plan circulating online to storm the Capitol.
This is not factual. So this is an unnamed source by The Independent, which is a rag, right? A British rag. This isn't the New York Times. I mean, again, not that the New York Times is good, but for her it's good, right? Like this is where they have to reach, like some, rag, some English rag magazine that's not, that sensationalizes this, that's on the level of the Inquirer, right? And so they have a anonymous source, and what he says here, there is no way that Scavino and Trump's social media operation would not have been aware of the plans circulating online to storm the Capitol. He's speculating. An unknown source is speculating, well, I don't have any evidence or proof of it. I just believe that they had to know. They had to know about this. Well, do you have proof that they know? And proof isn't looking at something online and taking it seriously, right? It would have to be Trump communicating with them and making this happen, right? Like what they're saying here is the proof. Well, let's listen to the rest of the quote.
Because, and I quote, "The Trump operation closely monitored the web's darkest corners, ranging from mainstream sites such as Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit, to fringe message boards like 4chan and XChan, now called XCon, to the Donald.win, an offshoot of a banned Reddit community dedicated to rabidly supporting all things Trump."
So I completed the video and I forgot a very essential point. So I'll stick this in somewhere probably towards the end of the video. But in terms of the case that they're presenting, which is this idea that Trump and these groups of people, radicalized right-wing people, somehow conspired to create an insurrection, and that Trump not only incited this, because it's got to be more than that to impeach him. It's got to be that he was planning this, that this was something that was a conspiracy to overthrow the government. Storming the Capitol Hill, he was trying to overthrow the government, and clearly that's not what happened. Based on the evidence that they're presenting, they don't have any evidence suggesting that. And a big piece of their evidence, their only piece of real evidence tying Trump to a premeditated plan to storm the Capitol, was an anonymous source, and I'll cover this more in a minute. This is, again, I'm in the editing process, and I want to stick this in somewhere. But an anonymous source that speculates that Trump's team was looking at all of these websites, 4chan and the rest of them, and so they knew about the plan. And so when they decided to have this rally on Capitol Hill, they were in some way colluding with these groups, even though there's no legitimate proof. They must have known, because they were monitoring all these websites and things before, and so they must have known if they had this, this protest, it would turn into a riot. And that's not evidence. It's not, again, it's somebody speculating. It's an anonymous person speculating, and I'll get into that more later. But in terms of this idea that they were planning an insurrection out in the open, you don't announce your plans out in the open. If you were going to have a coup, if you're going to overthrow the government, if you were going to do something like this, you don't announce it on social media, right? And you don't say things that are incriminating or possibly incriminating like Trump did. Like Trump is a blowhard. Like he's a boastful person. He boasts about things, and he tries to be a tough guy when he's really not, which I'm not condemning him for, because one of the good things was Trump was really an anti-war president. Now, Trump came in, I thought he was going to be a nightmare in terms of the military, because he was bragging about being willing to use the nuclear weapons. And a lot of people believe that, and it helped him in his foreign policy. I don't think he was, maybe he was doing it, I think he was more bragging than doing it as a strategy. But a lot of us, all of us thought that Trump was going to be a very pro-war president. And he came in, he wanted to have a North Korea military-style marching of the military down Pennsylvania Avenue the day he was sworn in 2016. I mean, they nixed that, right? But Trump was very pro-military, very pro-war in terms of the way he talked, and, he bragged his bravado. But when it came down to it, he pushed back against a lot of these wars. He pushed back against the war in Syria. He went with Bolton for a little while on Iran, but then he pushed back against that. He showed a hesitancy to create another one of these wars, Arab Spring wars, that were a part of the Obama administration. And I've often talked about the current master of the heartfulness system was asked by, there's a lot of liberal sort of people that do the system in America, and they were freaked out about when Trump got elected. So they asked him, what was going to happen, and what's it going to be, a nightmare? And he said he didn't want to comment because it's political. He was like, no, I don't want to say anything. But then he said, well, Hillary Clinton has a heart like a mango, and Trump has a heart like a coconut. And what that means is, and the heartfulness, idea is that people often have hard hearts and they have a soft exterior. And people think they're nice and people think they're good people, but their hearts are hard. And you'll find people like this you'll meet that you think are the nicest people, but then you realize, wow, that's a hard-hearted person. They've made a fake persona to act like they're nice even though they have a hard heart. But people with sensitive hearts, like, a mango has a soft flesh on the outside, right? A fruit on the outside and a hard center. And a coconut has a very hard shell externally, but a soft interior, right? And so people with soft hearts will often create a hard outer shell. And, he's the master of the heartfulness system, and the system works by reading people's hearts. When you give sittings, you read their hearts, and when you meet somebody, you automatically start sensing and feeling their heart. So he's an expert in this, analysis. I mean, he's the number one expert in this type of analysis. And he was saying Trump has a soft heart, which you can see that Trump, he bragged and he talked big. Like I said, he was a blowhard, but deep down, he wasn't somebody that was, vindictive in sense of violence in these things. He bragged about it. He said stupid things, and he posted stupid stuff. But deep down, he could have been more warlike. And I can see him trying to bully Mike Pence with the rioters or the protesters. I think the protest was there to intimidate and bully. Trump will be a bully, but he doesn't, have the stomach for violence, right? He's just one of these people. He grew up a wealthy person, and, again, he bullies people, but he doesn't do things that are physically violent. I think he has, a sensitivity to those things, and that's been proven throughout his presidency and probably throughout his life in these things. He's a boaster, a bragger, a bravado person, a blowhard, but he's not somebody who's actually violent in this way. And he has some sensitivity, and, he has a hesitancy to pull the trigger. And so somebody who is colluding with a bunch of people, and they're colluding to do something secret and private, wouldn't advertise all these things up front, and they wouldn't, say things and do things like Trump did that would later come back to haunt him. And I think Trump's done enough shady stuff in his life. He's done some underhanded things in business and as a president. And you can see this with his taped phone calls with Michael Cohen, where Trump was like, you're going to do that thing? Let's do that thing, like Goodfellas, right? You don't brag about the crime you're about to commit out in public, and that's what Trump and these dopes did. And so it wasn't a real plan. It was just a bunch of dopes doing dopey things, and Trump was the big dope, right? But it isn't, the case that the Democrats are making and the personality and the profile they're creating of Trump and these supporters isn't accurate. They're giving them a lot more credit for their ability to plan an insurrection. It was a bunch of dopes having like a frat party in the, having a dope party in the, in the Capitol building, and it was not so much them having some forethought about what was going to happen next and how this was going to play out. And a lot of them were shocked when they were arrested. And Trump was shocked that he was held accountable. So this isn't, the kind of conspiratorial masterminds the Democrats are trying to give Trump and his supporters or these people credit for. Okay, back to the original scheduled programming here.
Because, and I quote, the Trump operation closely monitored the web's darkest corners, ranging from mainstream sites such as Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit, to fringe message boards like 4chan and XChan, now called XCon, to the Donald.win, an offshoot of a banned Reddit community dedicated to rabidly supporting all things Trump.
See, that's the epitome of circumstantial evidence. They have an unnamed source reporting to a not respected newspaper that Trump had to know because his team regularly monitored these various fringe websites and things like this. So that would imply that they saw these things online. They had to. He doesn't have proof. He just is some person that claims to be an insider. Like this could be Q for all we know. Like, it's the same level as Q. Some anonymous person claiming to be an insider, claiming to have inside information. This is her proof. This is the Democrats' case against Trump, saying that he monitored their websites, and he didn't, that his team did, and they communicated to him because they must have. They must have seen these things. They must have communicated to him and told him. And then he went out and created this rally in full knowledge that this was going to happen because they were planning it out in public. And it was, again, not when you go back and you see the evidence that she presents, it's just a bunch of, radical, crazy people that are Q followers and people like this that posted some things. But, the storm language was there from Q and things like this, and they're putting that out there. But in terms of it being a specific plan, you saw the way these guys went in there. They're smashing windows, and, they were let in by the guards in some places, in other places they weren't. I mean, it wasn't some, they didn't even know where they were going, a lot of them. They were just wandering around the Capitol. I mean, it was a bunch of dopes, right? There might have been some people who, had a sense of what they were doing, right? Some people who had, premeditated this thing, sure. But to say that Trump must have known about it because some anonymous person says that he monitored these sites and that, with all the information, crazy information that's out there with Q and these things, that he would take it seriously because this Q stuff is completely off and wrong, and he knows that. And so, again, what he said was peacefully, right? When he went up, go up there and march peacefully. And he brought him to the steps, but he did nothing to encourage them to go in. He definitely provoked them so that they would be in a frenzied, they were flipped out, right? And he definitely, showed them that he was supporting them in some way. So that might have led them to believe that they were acting on his behalf, and he told them to go in there. They thought they were doing what Trump wanted, but a lot of it was like speculative, and it was jumps of things, that Trump was a flim-flam man, that Trump is somebody who says things that people want to hear, but they made leaps in these things. They made leaps that Trump wanted them to go get Mike Pence, which he didn't. Like, he, clearly didn't. I mean, based in everything that we see here. And he clearly didn't say that he did. He didn't say to go into the Capitol. And so they don't have a case. They have to show that Trump was involved in the plan of making this happen. He was involved in the plan to bring people to the Capitol, to bring people to Washington, D.C., to bring people up Capitol Hill, and he was responsible for them to march up to the Capitol building and show, voice their opinion. That's what he said to do. That's what he said in the speech. That's all he said. And there's no other evidence that shows that he wanted something more, and he communicated to these people that he wanted them to go in. Like, he didn't ever say that, and there's no evidence that he ever said it anywhere, or he implied that, or he, made that happen. He didn't do it. So this is, it's bogus. It's the same kind of circumstantial evidence and same kind of conspiracy theory type of mentality that everyone on the right gets condemned for. They're saying there's a conspiracy there without proof. It's a conspiracy theory based in speculation and circumstantial evidence. Not that there's nothing. Like, she presented, an okay case that there was circumstantial evidence and that Trump was cultivating the, anger and the emotions and the actions that took place. She presents that case. Yeah, that's there. That's possible, right? Trump is certainly responsible for provoking the crowd, and he's responsible to them for leading them and being a bad leader. He didn't take control of them. He didn't condemn certain behaviors. He didn't condemn certain groups, racist groups and things. He should have done all that stuff. Like, he definitely wasn't a good leader. He would definitely betrayed his followers. He set them up to do something that ended up costing all of them. I think on some level he wanted it. When he saw it happening, he felt good. Like, he felt, oh, wow. Like, he was probably pretty happy. I mean, that tweet he gave, showed that he was, he said, this is the kind of thing that happens. Like, he was thinking that the Dems got what they deserved, right? That they provoked this reaction. I'm sure that he was happy with it. I mean, but again, that's my speculation. but there's no evidence connecting him to some sort of conspiracy, a plan to overthrow the government. And so that's his whole case. And when you go to the Virgin Islands, and I was there, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 years ago. I don't know exactly when it was. It was in, I guess, in the 90s at some point. So, 25 years ago probably. And when I lived there was after a hurricane, the second hurricane that had hit there. And the place there was no tourists and it had fallen apart. And I talked about being this lawless place where the governor of one of the islands, St. Croix, because she mentioned St. Croix, that's where she was from. And all the people there speak with, the majority of islanders that are, there speak with, an island accent, like a Jamaican accent or something. So it's interesting that she has no accent, but she's the representative from the Virgin Islands. And it was so lawless there that the, governor was caught looting after the hurricane. I mean, there was all these, corruption there, and I've talked about it. And so much worse than what you see in terms of America, right? Just it isn't a strong government there. They have the tourist industry, but when you live there, when you're a part of the Virgin Islands community, it's a lot scarier, a lot of gangs, a lot of crime, a lot of corruption. And so she's saying this stuff I mean, compared to where she's from, and I don't know, that was years ago I was there, but I'm sure it's pretty much the same. Where she's from and what Donald Trump's doing is nothing compared to what the politicians there engage in, right? So what I'm saying here is my understanding of the Virgin Islands and the kind of corruption that's there, and she doesn't seem to represent the kind of accent, and I don't know, what her, I mean, I know nothing about her other than what was happening there, but I know about the Virgin Islands at least 25 years ago. But what I'm saying here is, yet I think that she knows that this is BS, right? Compared to the level of corruption that exists, plus all these people in D.C. who are taking money from special interests and how corrupt D.C. is. They have the public face, but most people don't believe in their senators. Most people don't believe in the legislature. More people have faith in the president and faith in Trump than they do in the, in the Congress and these groups, right? They don't have a high approval rating. And this is all speculation. And I know there's corruption. I know there's all these things that go on there. And this is speculation in terms of I can't prove there's criminal activity, but we all know it goes on, on a regular basis. And this is my whole point about all this stuff. Because the left definitely provoked, and the left-leaning Democratic politicians definitely were behind the Antifa riots, the same way that Trump was behind the Capitol Hill insurrection, right? But only one of those things is being accounted for, right? They're not having hearings based in the riots that took over whole cities that happened, that the media and the left wing and all these people cultivated, Chaz and Chad and all Chop and all these things that happened, right? There were stories that were pushed out by the media that clearly were to incite people in the Black Lives Matter movement and then other people. Then there was celebrities and all these people that pushed for justice, and they did it in such a way. They used strong language and things like you have to fight, things like this, right? And there was politicians that did that. And then it resulted in people acting out, thinking they had the backing of the government and the powers that be, and they took over whole cities and they did damage, burned down businesses, created criminal activity, and people died. It was very similar to what happened on Capitol Hill. But only one of these things is being covered by the media and being investigated by the powers that be, the FBI, and Trump is the only person being held accountable for this. And maybe a couple of other, that QB woman from the state of Florida in terms of the House of Representatives, but it's all one-sided. And when that happens, the people who are on that other side, the right side, right, who are being marginalized now, who are being deplatformed and all these things and being, demonized by the media, and they see that the other side had got away with all these things in Chaz and, Chop and these other places, riots that cities were burning all across the country, and nobody was held accountable in terms of, something like the impeachment that's happening here. None of the politicians and media that helped cultivate those actions are being held accountable, right? You understand this? And so it's a one-sided thing. And when that happens, and it happens at a time that's, there's going to be less because the economy collapsed in 2019, and then we had the whole, corona thing. And so when that all happens, there's going to be more and more reactions. And that's what they're pushing for. They're clearly instigating these things. They're instigating the right by shutting these things down. And, the way that the election went clearly was something they wanted to happen. They didn't want it to be clean because of the way that it went down. They wanted Trump to think he was cheated. They wanted Trump to act out. They wanted his supporters to think this. Again, that's me saying based in what I see, and I'm, pretty accurate with all these things, but it's not something where you could arrest these people and charge them with a crime. Like, I recognize that there's not enough proof. Like, I know what happened. Like, I can see what happened, but there's not enough proof to criminalize these people. But they certainly could have deplatformed them. They could have deplatformed all the left-wing people, all the mainstream media that were pushing these riots and pushing the right-wing people and provoking them. There was enough evidence for Facebook and Twitter and Google to do the same thing to the extreme left that they're doing to the extreme right, but they're not doing that. And that can only mean that they want to provoke. They want people on the right to feel cheated, which they are already, and Trump definitely played into this, but so did the left. And so this is why I say this is a binary system, and they are just changing the power dynamics. And if you're someone who identifies with Trump and Trump supporters, you're now feeling like you're being marginalized and demonized because they want you to feel that way. They want you to feel like the world, the Make America Great Again thing has died, and your America is dying with it. And they want you to act out so they can demonize you even more. And there's no acting out isn't going to do anything. Like, there was just a bunch of idiots running through the Capitol building, dressed up in horns with body makeup, some of them, and acting like fools, and now they're all paying for it. And America, the people who are in the truth community, and people who are looking to get the real truth out there, people who are, seeing beyond the left-right paradigm, are now handcuffed because of it, right, in terms of social media and the rest of it. And so you did damage to all these things. And there is a way, a spiritual way, to rise above the binary system, the left-right paradigm, rise above the American culture, and go to a whole nother level of functioning where you're doing God's bidding, right? And this is what needs to happen. This is why I talk about the heartfulness meditation, a spiritual solution, where you realize that politics is always going to be corrupt, and that politicians and our government and system has gone beyond the point where it can be saved, right? It's been like that forever. There's too much money from foreign governments and special interests, and these politicians have been bought and sold, and the system is rigged so much that the power structure could never be overturned. And if it was, the system would collapse anyway, because it's all, it's a smoke and mirrors. There's no money. It's all based in debt. I've covered this before. And when you realize that, you're like, what are my other options? Well, you go and you work for God, and you work on yourself, and you become a better person, and trying to change these people that you think are evil, or get them to be, thrown in Gitmo or whatever stupid thing that you believe, right? Instead of trying to fix the so-called elite, you work on yourself, trying to, fix the people who are the most broken. I mean, that's one of the problems with our system. It props up and looks at the people who are the worst, the sociopaths and the people like them, people who are big ego people, celebrities and politicians, and people with money and greed and hoarders, people that hoard wealth and all these things, who are in the sense the lowest among us, the most selfish in things. So instead of trying to fix them or, take their positions or usurp them and take away their power and, fix the system that's broken and corrupt, you work on yourself and you become a better person, and you start manifesting a better world through spirituality, through your connection with God within. Again, throw off your religious shackles and your religious beliefs that are, indoctrinating you to believe that God is far off and, all these things. Because religions are a big part of the problem here. And so there's a spiritual solution, which I talk about. The Heartfulness meditations here for that very purpose at this very time. And, you know, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. Right now it doesn't look good, but, you know, there's going to be changes in the future and things are going to go in a different direction. And people are being prepared spiritually, whether they know it or not. And some of them will make the right decision. And there'll be less people because there'll be, you know, things that depopulate the planet. And when all those things happen, there'll be things will swing towards the spiritual way of existence. Things will swing in a better direction. Right now we're going downhill and it looks desperate, but things can change in an instant. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano definitely reporting from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.